I'd like to call the Comox Valley Regional District regular board meeting of Tuesday, June 29th, 2021 to order. We have all the directors in the boardroom today, and I guess that means that not many of us have air conditioning at home. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, who have stewarded these lands, air, and water since time immemorial. And today we have Article 35 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Indigenous peoples have the right to determine the responsibilities of individuals to their communities. And with that, we move to the in-camera motion. Grieve and Hamir, thank you. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. We're on to C, adoption of minutes from June 15th. Moran and Arbor, thank you. Anyone opposed to adoption of the minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. We're on to petitions and delegations. And I'll just confirm that we have the first delegation speakers. Yes, okay. So the first delegation is Mosaic Forest Management.
Second.
Thank you. Arbor and Cole Hamilton. And we have Molly Hudson and David Belesny.
Got it.
Right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for fitting us on your agenda today. I hope everyone is managing the heat all right. Sorry, I'm not sure who's presenting. Would you mind if I shared my screen just so that I can control the slides? Is that all right?
Yep, we usually do it, but she will arrange it so you can do it yourself.
It's if it's not possible, it's.
We're making you the host.
There she is.
Am I back? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
So we're not. So I'll just carry on like this. You can't share screen. That's fine.
Yes. Yeah. We're working on it. Sorry.
No, all good.
Yes, you should be able to control it now.
Okay. Share screen. Yes. How's that looking on your end?
It has shrunk. So yeah. Okay. If you could put it
There it
to
is.
slide view. Yeah. Great.
How's that? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. And thanks again for having us. I'm Molly Hudson, Director of Sustainability at Mosaic Forest Management. And with me today is David Belesny, our Manager of Hydrology and Terrain. We're going to talk to you a little bit today about our watershed management, our work in the Langley Lake area. But before I dive in, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm in our Campbell River office today, which is on the traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, the Wewaikum and the Wewakai nations, as well as the Hamelco Nation. So with that, I will jump in here. So as I said, there's a nice shot of Langley Lake there on the right. We're going to talk about watershed management and Langley Lake, and then get into harvest planning. And I hope we'll have time for some questions at the end. Just a quick introduction to Mosaic to start. We're a 100% Canadian owned organization. We're owned by the BC and federal pension funds and responsible for forest management on both private managed forest land and Crown licenses, in those tree farm licenses are generally north of Campbell River, and south of Campbell River is our private managed forest land. We are operating primarily on second and third growth forests, and we also work with other forest owners and forest tenure holders to manage and market their timber, and in particular, many good relationships with First Nations to work with them on their forest management objectives. Responsible stewardship is a really key part of our business. It's important to our success. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of the third-party certifications that we are voluntarily a part of to support our stewardship mandate. And first off, I'll highlight the Sustainable Forestry Initiative certification. That's our forest management certification, covers everything from environmental and conservation practices for wildlife, water quality, biodiversity, and sustainable harvesting practices, as well as a whole bunch of other goals, and has a lot, really provides the backbone of our forest management systems. Next up, I want to highlight our Carbon Trust certification, which is a third-party verified carbon footprint for our entire organization, including our supply chain, and it's a big step for us on our path towards carbon neutrality, and we're very focused on opportunities in the forest carbon space these days as well. Finally, on this screen, I'd like to highlight our Progressive Aboriginal Relations certification. We were really proud last year to be the first BC forest company to become silver level certified to this framework that's administered by the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, and really provides structure to our work and commitment to working with Indigenous peoples, and our commitment to a positive and shared future on Vancouver Island and the BC coast, and in forest management in particular. Some of you may have seen this recently. We've recently released our 2020 Sustainability Progress Report, which highlights some of our achievements from 2020. Today, I'll just note that we have a really robust and unparalleled, in my opinion, reforestation program on the BC coast. We planted over 11 million seedlings last year, and we did that under all of the restrictions of COVID, without any COVID exposures in our tree planting efforts. So we're really proud of all of our reforestation and our silviculture efforts. I'd also like to highlight that we've been working in recent years to reduce our pile burning and manage our residual debris a bit differently. And so last year we reduced our on-site burning by another 10% for a total reduction of over 26% since 2018. This report has lots of great stories in it. I encourage you to check it out at mosaicforest.com. And then just to highlight a few of the great partnerships that we have in the CVRD, including volunteer and local government partnerships to do cleanups on forest lands, started around Earth Day, but has continued since. And there are many great partners in the CVRD that help us with this. A great partnership with the Fanny Bay Salmon Enhancement Society, one of their smaller hatcheries, is on a piece of our private land near Wilford Creek. And I'm sure everyone's aware of our wonderful partnership with the United Riders of Cumberland that brings thousands and thousands of mountain bikers to the village every year to recreate on our private forest lands. After that quick recreational highlight, I'd like to pass it to David, who's going to highlight the Solum and some research partnerships and some more collaborative work we do with the CVRD.
Yeah, and get into Langley Lake watershed planning in the next 4 minutes or so quickly, and just highlight the Solum folks, as they're doing great work, and we were reviewing in the field with them last week, and I know there's the Agricultural Advisory Committee being presented on. I'm on the committee on that, and it's important for us, of course, to be part of this integrated watershed planning across our numerous operations. So again, thanks. And I wanted to highlight the weather station that was identified as a priority in the watershed protection plan. It was 2 years of not having success getting it in the park, and we were able to find a suitable spot on our lands with VIU, Flinroe, and yourselves, and have this long-term station, which is important data. Snow and ice in a changing climate is critical to the Comox Valley and Mosaic. So good science underpins everything we do, starting with quality long-term data, and as well as more important water quality data, which I'm going to speak to in a bit here. So next slide. And this is from our fact sheet we sent you and is on our website. So we have annual meetings where we share our operating plans. This occurred with UBID and CVRD this past year, as it does every year, and we're working towards a more formal Mosaic MOU with UBD, UBID, or I guess with CVRD now, and that'll include Langley Lake. We'll have a separate one for Cumberland. We can cover off information sharing, security, fire, water quality, and other priorities to ensure safe and collaborative purveyance of water. Water is really protected from source to tap. And there's many sources. Mine is from the Nanaimo watershed. I know you guys are drinking from the Comox Valley, and we actually operate in 34 community watersheds up and down Vancouver Island. And that's not actually a current layer. The Private Managed Forest Land Act prohibits us negatively impacting drinking water, and that would include licensed water intakes and single domestic intakes. So there's over 200 community and single domestic intakes that we manage around. And we can't control the water source, but we can manage that risk. And I'm going to spend a couple minutes here on that in our Langley watershed plans here. So majority of Langley Lake was logged in that 1916 to 1925 time period. Today, it's in that period of advanced second growth, and we have 3 owners in that 400 hectare sub-basin really of a greater Heart watershed. And so we have 2 detailed watershed assessments done by the same third-party specialist, and your staff have been involved in both those assessments. And so we're managing our spatial rate of cut and timing of harvest that Molly's going to speak to in detail. I highlight the green is the deepest part of the lake, about 10 meters. And you can see those floating peat islands that contribute to that high natural organics in there. And the picture to the left is the Nanaimo watershed. We have these detailed transects of creeks showing improved riparian structure, narrowing channels, and overall increased water quality during our active operations the last 20 years. So the ephemeral Langley streams don't show up as nice in pictures, but we've seen improvement in water and fish habitat here. So next slide to finish it up. Yeah, just that we continue to defer harvest as UBID got their multi-barrier water filtration plant online, and we're happy to see no boil water advisories this past winter. And our plans this year, as Molly will go in, are light touch. Hydrology is complex and our operations need to evolve for sure with science and technology, and we're doing that and continue to do that and take a precautionary approach to watershed management. The bottom left is some of the early water quality monitoring, and I highlight this time period. This is when I first entered the watershed and really got to learn about these elevated natural levels that didn't really correlate with our operations. You have high turbidity from fine textured soils and stream banks, and that happens during storm events. You'll see spikes above 5 NTU. And then there's elk usage and access. Extreme drought and fire risk are a real risk as well that we're managing through our sustainable forest management and collaboration with UBID and the CVRD staff. So I just highlight that no 2 watersheds are the same, and because of the size of this watershed and reservoir, we are actually down to the individual culvert level of detail risk mitigation with your staff versus maybe more integrated planning risk sub-basin work in the Comox watershed. So yeah, it's a partnership approach. We're encouraged to have long-term, respectful, knowledgeable staff at both UBID and CVRD. And yeah, Molly's gonna talk about the care. We're gonna go into the operations now.
Thanks, Dave. So now that we have all that context from David for the Langley Lake watershed in particular, I just wanted to provide a little bit more site level detail here. This blue outline delineates the watershed boundary that David was describing. And so we have planned in this area 2 small openings of about 9 hectares each, kind of in the upper end of the watershed on benign slopes. There's no water in these blocks today. These are ephemeral, non-fish streams, and you can see that we've buffered them out and retained have a strategic retention plan around some areas that can be seasonally wet. We have single tree leaf retention highlighted in both openings. And in order to avoid using this route beside the lake, we'll be hauling out this direction out through the Hancock properties on Buckley, Maine. To give you another view here, this plan that we're presenting today and we've been discussing has been the result of multi-years of work. Much of it at the watershed scale, as David described, with watershed assessments and third-party experts weighing in, but also at the site level. These plans have been discussed with water purveyors for many years. And as David said, we had deferred our plans at the request pending the future water treatment plant, which came online last year. In this year, both UBID and CVRD staff have been engaged in these plans and toured the area in some cases, as well as the local area director. And we've heard that, you know, while there are some watershed level concerns here, these harvest units themselves, no one has raised concerns or expressed concerns with water quality in these blocks, mainly because they're not directly contributing to the lake because they don't have a connectivity to the water courses here. It's important in this area and was recommended through the watershed assessments that we operate in this area in the driest parts of the year. As I said, these are ephemeral streams, so are dry at this point. And so when our focus is water quality, operating in the dry is a key risk mitigation strategy. And so that drives our timing in this area. And I'll also say that, you know, we really value our relationship with the CVRD and look forward to working with the CVRD in the Langley Lake watershed. I know it's new coming up this week in terms of assuming the role as water purveyor here. And we do really celebrate all of the years of collaboration that we've had with the CVRD on managing other drinking watersheds as well. And so in this case, we feel really confident that our plan to harvest is, when weather conditions permit, will result in the maintenance of drinking water quality here. And it definitely doesn't preclude future conversations on watershed management with the CVRD. We believe and regularly demonstrate across our operations that working forests and safe, clean drinking water delivered to the citizens of the Comox Valley can coexist. And in many cases, as David highlighted a few, water management can actually be improved by working forest infrastructure. And, you know, if you think about the risk of forest fires and how our infrastructure and resources can protect drinking watersheds from the risk of fire, that is highlighted. Finally, to close, I'd just like to highlight here the informational sheet that we distributed to you with our letter last meeting. It contains many of the topics that we've highlighted today, and we're more than happy to engage with anyone who would like further details on our forest management or the plans that we talked about today, and looking forward to continuing collaboration with the CVRD on the whole range of topics as we do today. And so looking forward to continuing that in the future. And with that, I'm a bit over time. Apologies for that. And thank you. I'll turn it back to you, to the chair.
Great. Thanks for the presentation. Are you available for questions?
Absolutely. Yes.
We do have a few.
Of course.
And Director Arbor.
Thank you, and nice to see you, Molly and David. And
you as well.
I have to tell the board I did get the opportunity to go and tour behind Langley Lake with them after our last board meeting, and it's clear to me that Mosaic is blessed with having really awesome staff and progressive foresters that I think get the bigger picture. I think it still doesn't necessarily address many of the concerns that I have and that others share around the type of management in watersheds like this one. I would also note to the board that following our motion last week asking for a deferral, it was brought up at the Union Bay Improvement District's very last meeting, and they voted unanimously in favor of supporting the CVRD motion. And their staff even, their key staff even said that at the closing of his statements that, of course, the ideal scenario was for no logging to occur in the watershed. But I think there's, you know, it's just a slow journey as the province moves towards more and more towards ecosystem-based management, multiple value management. I think a lot of the public is starting to see some of the trends, and I think even the heat of the last few days, definitely when I think about Langley Lake, reminded me of things like water retention, water recharge, watershed recharge, all those different things that were we may not have fully the pulse on yet. And since then, I don't want to wrap it up, but because this is a CVRD presentation, and I have heard that you know, Mosaic is also maybe looking at logging and putting roads near Allen Lake in the Cumberland jurisdiction, which is actually part of it in Area A. So I wouldn't lift the request for a pause so we can work collaboratively. And I think with Molly and David, we have talked about other opportunities to realize value from Mosaic through either carbon credits programs, which this board has asked a lot of questions about over the last 3 years. I believe a project could be supported through local governments, and I'd be keen to explore those avenues. But I at first, and lastly, I just want to say I really appreciate all the work that Mosaic is doing on a range of projects. It's just on this one issue, I personally have a difference of opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hamir.
Well, thanks to Molly and David for the presentation. Just a couple of things I would love some clarification on. You mentioned that the work that you're doing is helping to support fire suppression. I'm just wondering what the correlation is between like cut blocks and fire suppression. I would have thought kind of the opposite, that cut blocks would be more dry and would, but I'm not a forester. So would you be able to explain that correlation?
Absolutely, yeah. So when we head into this, fire-prone season, we really mobilize a lot of resources to ensure that we're protecting the forests. And so some of that is the access management that David highlighted briefly, where this watershed itself is closed to the public. And so most fires that we've seen this year, and I'm sure it will continue going forward, are public ignitions. So reducing that ignition source is your best way to protect against fires. If we do have an ignition, we have a huge amount of resources dedicated to putting that fire out as quickly as possible. And that includes helicopters that are dedicated just to us to get on those fires as quickly as possible. We have countless fire trucks and fire suppression systems across our land base that can be deployed at any moment. And those roads are open and easily accessible when we need to get there. So we have the ability to suppress any ignition as soon as possible. And in addition, we have a really great partnership and agreement with the BC Wildfire Service, and they support us in that initial attack as well. So, as we move into this season and we hear throughout the province that there are a number of public ignitions in these dry conditions, we feel like we've put a lot of resources and professional backing to our ability to fight those fires on our private land base. So we're protecting an asset here, but in this case, we're also protecting a community's drinking watershed.
Okay, I think that clarifies it a bit more for me. It's not necessarily the activity that you're doing that is supporting fires. It's the ancillary work of preventing people from coming in, et cetera. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. Thanks.
Sure.
And if I may just have one more question, Chair. You brought up our water treatment plant a couple of times. And again, I'm just wondering what the correlation is between the plant that we're building on Comox Lake and your activities either at Langley or at Allen Lake, as Director Arbors mentioned. Would you be able to clarify that?
Sure, I'll start and then David can chime in. So we're referring here to the water treatment plant that treats the water for the citizens of Union Bay.
Okay.
So they're pulling water from Langley Lake, and maybe I'll just let David fill in a little bit of the history there.
Yeah, that's right. That they were the first one in the valley to get that filtration online, and I think that now the CVRD and the Comox has the second one online now, I believe. So yeah, that's the idea was that we would defer harvest in this more smaller watershed. You saw the kind of the turbidity going in, and so lots of boil water advisories because of just the high natural levels. So we through our partnership decided to wait a few years until that plant was online. And I guess just to further your question on the cut blocks feel drier, but as we see a changing climate in Langley Lake in particular, it could be drying out and turning into more of that peat bog. And so we want to encourage water quantity into that reservoir. And by removing these trees in advanced second growth, more rain hits the ground, and it gets into the water. So there is actually a lot of research that, we can support water quantity by doing openings like this. Smaller openings can support, because you don't want to do too much because you impact peak flows, but there's this balance that we're working through. And the Coke Sila is a really good example of a changing climate. There's a water sustainability plan coming there. And so I think a lot of people on the island will be looking at that watershed for the drought side, the challenges there.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever heard that before, that a cut block supports water. So thanks for providing that.
Director Swift.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. Just by way of information, but as the crow flies, how close is your cut block to the lake?
Sure.
I don't have a sense of how far away it is.
Yeah, that's fair. So the closest point to the lake is about 600 meters, and it extends to about, you know, a kilometer or more away. So the closest point of the cup, the opening that was on the east or the right side of the screen, it is at 600 meters from the shoreline.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, and so just to make the point that we were talking about the water plants and Cumberland and Allen Lake, we did a new water treatment plant which has UV and chlorine, but it does not have filtration. So there is concern from that perspective. And I feel like the answer that often comes from private forestry companies is that, you know, you're doing the best science, but it's the best from the type of forestry that you're doing, which is the clear cutting and slash and burn, which is not necessarily the best forestry science. And I would argue that selective logging and possibly even heli logging in sensitive watersheds would be superior forestry techniques. So what you're really saying when you're saying that you're doing the best science is that within that narrow view of clear-cut logging being the cheapest method, then you apply the best science to mitigate the damage of that particular technique. And I really feel like the private mass forest lands operate under a more for-profit model than from a watershed health model. And I think that's where local governments are coming from. As was said, we are moving more toward ecosystem services and the trees intercepting rainwater, preventing runoff. And I know you said that that can be helpful in some instances, but most of the time that's carrying soils and turbidity. It reduces the amount of infiltration into the soil. So when you're removing all those things, it's pretty hard to say that that's a benefit to the water system.
There's lots to touch on there. You know, maybe I'll start with, you know, we harvest in a whole bunch of different ways across the landscape. You know, in the Langley Lake context, we're talking about openings that are around 9 hectares, and they will have retention in them. And, you know, we're on a part of the island where the natural disturbance type was fire, and Douglas fir grows up in the sunshine. And so, you know, creating openings of kind of 5 hectares minimum is what creates the silvicultural conditions so that we can regrow that next stand in the best possible way. So it's also a reforestation choice that we make in order to ensure that the Douglas fir seedlings that we're putting in the ground are able to grow in the best possible conditions. And so, you know, there is an ecological basis for our harvest methodologies here. And, you know, in terms of our kind of forest management, you know, the cycle of forest management on the east coast of the island was started, you know, by First Nations millennia ago, and by our predecessor companies over 100 years ago. And we've been managing our forested landscape, you know, in a different way every time we re-enter the forest, as we learn more, and we are on this continuous improvement and learning journey that is supported by the research that David talked about, and by, you know, internal professionals as well as external professionals. So I just want to reassure you that this isn't solely a cost model, and even if this were Crown land, these areas could be available for harvest in the very same way that we've planned and discussed here today. So the fact that it's privately owned doesn't necessarily mean that the methods of design and the approach of collaboration would necessarily be different. I missed my last point, so maybe I'll leave it there. But you know, I do want to reassure you that there are a huge number of professionals working on these plans. These decisions are not made solely from a cost perspective. You know, and my last point was on ecosystem services. You know, currently these are private forest lands. We pay millions of dollars in taxes every year, whether we harvest these lands or not. So, you know, in the case of the Village of Cumberland's watershed, those ecosystem services are you know, all of those trees functioning as they are on the landscape, as well as all of the infrastructure that we have, including roads to access these areas that allow village staff to observe and maintain village infrastructure. Those are all provided by Mosaic as you know, as a mutual benefit, and we really do approach our management of drinking watersheds as one of mutual benefit, and are happy to hear that some of our water purveyor partners agree with us there, that we can have long-standing collaborative work that results in communities having clean, safe drinking water consistently, and working forest objectives being achieved as well. So we think that they can go hand in hand, and we have lots of examples of that happening across our land base.
Thank you. Yeah, I have one more question about a constituent put forward, and it was around herbicide use in the watershed, and whether that would be used in the Langley Lake and Allen Lake areas.
So I don't know the specifics. You know, we don't come up with those detailed plans until, you know, we've gone through our reforestation step. But, you know, we always use manual treatments. So, you know, saws and manual removal as our first choice, particularly in sensitive areas. So we would not go to herbicide unless it was absolutely necessary. And if that were the case, it would be spot treatment only. I believe in the case of Langley Lake, we would use manual treatment for any brush management.
Great, thank you. Director Grieve.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say hello to Molly. I think you might remember
I do.
approached you about 7 years ago regarding the Forbidden Plateau reclamation.
I do remember.
And I think at the time we were looking to get some money to help the volunteers take that down. Unfortunately, I think there was some changes in the company and personnel, and it never came to fruition. But with the will of the chair, I'd like to change gears just a little bit, because on our agenda today, just after you, we have the Hearth Patio and Barbecue Association of Canada making a presentation about basically wood burning. And you know, I'm just wondering if Mosaic has ever been approached by any third party about using some of the biomass that's left up in the cut blocks to make wood pellets and things like that. And is the company open to that kind of utilization of the waste product?
Sure. Yeah, great question. And you know, in short, yes, we're always interested in looking for uses of our residual fiber. And you know, part of those efforts that I mentioned related to our sustainability report to reduce our pile burning is because we have been able to increase our utilization, and that's through, you know, increased commercial firewood contractors. It's through chipping on site and distributing that material, and we are approached somewhat regularly by organizations that are trying to make a business out of utilizing that fiber, and we're always open to it. So we do have some great partnerships already, and we look forward to hearing from anyone who has other great ideas about how we can safely remove that fiber. We're often challenged with financial margins in that case. If you think about the back end of the Comox Valley watershed, it can be quite a haul out of there. But we're always open to that discussion as we continue on our path to reducing our residual fiber.
But nothing on the near horizon yet.
Nothing broad in scope, Director. We have localized partnerships with smaller organizations, and we have been approached by some larger groups in the past, but nothing that's come to fruition yet. But currently, we're kind of working in localized partnerships rather than something that covers our entire land base or the entire CVRD, for example.
Yeah, my understanding is they can create a plant in something not much larger than the sea can. And they're doing
There you
so
go.
in the interior. So, okay, that looks great. Thank you very much for allowing me to deviate a little bit from
Sure.
the water issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add to that with carbon, there is that opportunity, and we know fire releases methane 25 times more powerful than carbon. And with us tracking that, we know that that's got to be a big focus, reducing our residual burning, no fires, as Molly was saying, that is a key goal. So we're open. We're looking at the government, asking them how would they encourage more incentives for all industry and communities to help with this problem. So yeah, we're doors wide open for anything on that.
Great, thank you. We have one more question, Director Arbour.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, one last one, and just a quick note on what David just said. He did get a commitment from me to, in my new role at FCM, to advocate for whatever can actually help with carbon management and carbon credit and whatnot. But maybe my final question for today would be to Molly. So you have a resolution from both the CVRD and the Union Bay Improvement District to defer logging in the Langley Lake watershed. So are you here to report today that you will disregard those two motions and proceed with logging this summer?
So, as I hope I shared today, we feel a high degree of confidence in our plans that, we can continue to purvey water in collaboration with the CVRD as of July 1st to the citizens of Union Bay. And so weather permitting, we will be following the recommendations of the Watershed Assessment to attempt to complete harvest in the dry season this year.
Okay, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I don't see any further questions.
Great.
Hopefully you can find a nice shady tree to sit under today.
Thank you very much. You as well. Bye.
Thanks. Okay, so we're on to item 2. Oh, sorry. Yeah, vote on receipt. Anyone opposed to receipt? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. Now we move to item 2, the Sid Williams Theatre. Deborah Renz and Brian Mather. Oh, and Ash Shekatwat. I don't see Deborah on the call yet, so want us to. Okay, staff are saying that Deborah's not on the call.
Yes,
Would
I
you
am.
like us? Oh, okay.
Yes, I am.
She's here. Okay, great. Arbor and Amir, thank you. So welcome, Deborah, Brian, and Ash. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for sharing your time with us on this hot day. I hope your air conditioning is better than mine right now. Some of you may already know me, be familiar with me. I'm Brian Mather. I'm president of the Sid Williams Theatre Society. I'm joined today by Ash and by Deb, our general manager. First off, I want you to know that I'm not asking for anything. I'm not complaining about anything. I just want to check in with you, let you know how we're doing, what we're doing, and where we think we're going. On a personal note, I have a lot of history with the Sid Theatre from the time it was first taken over by the city of Courtenay. And I knew Sid Williams himself very well. In fact, I directed him, acted with him on stage in that theater, and I was honored to be able to call him my friend. So it's been a challenging year. The Sid has felt the full effects of the pandemic. We've had virtually no rental income, and yet we're still here. We're still being a presence in the community, and because of this, because that is what we are, one of the cultural hubs for the entire valley. Our regular audiences, as you know, come from Fanny Bay to Black Creek, and in 2019, we had over 239 bookings and sold over 46,000 tickets to audience members. In the first quarter of 2021, January 1st to March 31st, we sold 436 tickets. To say that our income had taken a hit would be putting it mildly. So why are we here today? Because basically we just want to let you know that we are still here, and that federal and provincial grants and the support from our main event sponsors and community sponsors and community support and the cash reserves that we've accumulated over the past years has helped keep our staff employed. In fact, all of our staff have been employed for the full term of the pandemic. Thanks to the management team for the excellent stewardship, we continue to be optimistic for the future, and we are ready for the reopening. As a board, we've made many changes. We were in the process of creating a strategic plan when the pandemic hit. We switched from strategic planning to survival planning, and have managed to maintain ourselves fairly well. All our focus has been on the initial impact of the potential catastrophe and how we could mitigate the circumstances that surrounded it. So as a board, we did a lot of work. We changed from into a complete governance style of board. We created succession planning for our GM. We created an operations plan that's based on the strategic plan. And we are revising all our existing policies and creating new ones that are consistent with the governance model. Operational policies have been separated out and are now under the sole jurisdiction of the general manager and the management team. In short, we have a talented, experienced board that is dedicated to the success of the SID. And our staff are to be commended. They've overcome the obstacles that COVID has thrown at the theater. They've created innovative opportunities for individuals and small groups to perform. And those performances have been videographed and streamed over the internet. Small cast plays have been shared with the community. Dancers have been able to compete or audition in a virtual world. And we've even been able to stream some of our local performers in concert. The SID will be hosting CYMC in July as part of our reopening. And we will be welcoming more regular events starting in September. Yes, we are so happy to see that light at the end of the tunnel. I believe that although the building is in Courtenay, the SID belongs and serves the entire valley. As I said earlier, the SID is one of the cultural hubs that attracts audiences from the entire community. It also serves local performers in a way that's not obvious. I was part of a video presentation that was filmed in February. There were 4 performers in that presentation. And when we walked into the SID and walked on that stage, every performer looked around, took a deep breath, and said, "It's so good to be back." You have, well, you probably do have an idea of the importance of the Sid Williams Theatre in the lives of so many of our local community members. And we're hoping that as we reopen, the audiences too will say, "It is so good to be back." Because I firmly believe that it's more than a building. It's part of the soul of the valley. And we're just hopeful that we can continue to provide entertainment and support to cultural groups for many years to come. That's it from me. I thank you for your continued support. The regional district has been a very active supporter, and we're very grateful for that. Ash is one of the newest members of our board, and he wants to share with you some of his personal observations as being a new member in this organization. So over to you, Ash.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. A very good afternoon to all the CVRD members out there. Thank you for giving us your time today. We are very grateful. Having said so, my time with the board so far has been nothing but surreal. I get to work with some amazing leaders, and I would say including our president in the board, Brian, and the initiatives they've taken, even while working in this whole pandemic situations and things that we could do to just keep moving forward instead of stopping. And that's why we are here. So happy that we're finally seeing that light at the end of the tunnel, as Brian mentioned. And it would be so great, like all the artists, I personally feel would be so grateful to just see this all happening again, that yes, we can perform again, we can go out, we can do things. And another important point, as Brian mentioned, that yes, the building is in Courtney, but the SID belongs to everyone in the whole valley. And yeah, it's been nothing but good. So thank you so much for giving us the time. And I'm so sorry I'm sitting in my car and doing this. I was at work. And I will just pass on to Deb for all the questions or queries if any of the members have it for us. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks, Brian. God, you guys are making me tear up a little bit there. I have to say, I live in Union Bay, so I was very excited and interested in the last presentation too. I took way more notes than for my own. Anyway, thank you, Regional Chair and board members. I would reiterate what Brian and Ash said, that we are so grateful for the support and funding we've had from all levels of government, from our municipal and regional governments, from the provincial government, from the federal government, and from some private sector funders as well. And I suspect I'm going to write a letter to Mosaic and see if they want to sponsor anything at the theater. Why not? Very quickly, I will just give you a very fast operational snapshot of Brian touched on some of the activities that we've been doing, and I'm going to give you a little bit, just a quick tour through that, because that's what we have been doing with your funding this year, and we thought we'd like you to know about it. Very interestingly, in March, we had strategic planning, March of 2020. Our last strategic planning session, we had you opened the meeting with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And one of our very last presentations in March of 2020 was Senator Murray Sinclair talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 94 calls to action. And that was actually, we didn't realize it at the time, but it was our first virtual event because of COVID. The senator couldn't come, we had to Skype him in. So since then, we've turned it the other way around. The performers are here, but the audience is not. In the spring and summer of 2020, we were able to do a number of small youth engagement activities in order to replace for our performing arts community the year-end activities that they normally do. So we were able to accomplish that. And we were able to do a lot of staff and volunteer COVID training, so that the idea being in the fall, if we had audiences back, remember this is 2020, we would be ready for them. We were also very grateful to get a grant from ICE-T, Island Coastal Economic Trust, for a live streaming camera system. And that has been enabled us to keep operational because we've been able to convert our on-stage activity to online video. So we had to do training for our personnel on that as well. In the fall of 2020, we started with some hybrid programming of both live and virtual events, and those were some of our own presentations and some collaborations with rental groups, including my highlight of the whole time, which was the Child Development Association Telethon, which was a record-breaking fundraising year for them. So we were really delighted to be able to provide those types of hybrid services. Of course, you know, we went into more of a shutdown, getting into winter and spring of 2021. All of our events were virtual, and we had to really narrow down performers because of travel restrictions. So we really, the good part of that is we got to showcase a lot of island performers, and we saw some really innovative productions by local event producers, such as Courtney Little Theatre did Quarantine, some very interesting small plays. And we have Comox Valley Arts Council has done their songwriters series, which is showcasing songwriters in the Comox Valley, both performing and talking about their work. So I feel like I've gotten to know the performers of our region even better than previously. And, you know, I was just doing a final report for a funder today, and yes, I'm watching my stopwatch, so I'm almost done here. I was just doing a report for a funder today, and we actually had 24 virtual Sid Williams Theatre presented events over the course of our July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021 fiscal year, which is only, usually we do about 36 events, so it's not as cut off as I thought it would be. I was surprised to see the number. So, in the month of June, right now that we're wrapping up, we were able to do quite a bit of both Pride programming and June Indigenous programming, because June is, of course, Pride Month, but also National Indigenous Peoples History Month. So we were really happy to work with those communities to bring some diversity to our stage. And in July, Brian mentioned, we are so happy after this has been 2 years now to welcome a very small musical theater camp of CYMC back to the SID. In August, we are doing a big gear up and volunteer retraining to reopen in September. I hope to see all of you there. I'm sure I will see most of you there. And I think possibly one of your directors there is possibly working on a presentation that I'm talking to you, Edwin. I'm sure you're going to be up there on stage at some point soon. And with that, I just wanted to mention another aspect of COVID that we've been able to accomplish is we have switched a lot of our operational systems to cloud-based systems. So we have switched our theater booking system, our ticket box office system, as well as our volunteer management system to cloud-based. So that really allows us to work in both virtual land and physically on site. So that has really changed our capacity. And we're really hoping to be able to continue all of these services post-COVID, because it just enables us to reach more people, which is in a small theater, that's our goal. And with that, I just want to again thank the Regional District for their support throughout this whole time, because that's why we're still here. That is why we're still here, to open and serve the community soon. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm here to try to help.
Great. Thanks so much for the presentation. It was a little bit over, and I'm a little bit concerned about Ash sitting in his car. He may be cooking by now. So hopefully there are not too many questions for you. Dr. Hanier?
I'll make it quick. Thank you. And thanks for the presentation from all three of you. It's wonderful to see that the SID is surviving, and it sounds like stronger than ever. As a board, you know, this board did highlight our cultural and arts sector as a main driver in our economic recovery from COVID. And I'm just wondering if you could outline what your interaction has been, any supports that you've been able to get, and have you been able to connect with our new contractor, Tourism Vancouver Island, and have they been able to support any of your work?
Very good timing that you asked me that question, because yes, we have Tourism Vancouver Island just did a site visit last week, did a tour with their new visitor info center personnel for the summer, and we have already been able to work with our cultural partners such as Comox Valley Art Gallery and the Courtney District Museum and Comox Valley Arts to put together a marketing piece. So absolutely, we are on track with them and looking forward to brighter times.
Great. Thanks again for your presentation. Hope you all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're on receipt. Is there anyone opposed to receipt? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we're on to item 3, which is the Hearth Patio and Barbecue Association of Canada. We have a rather large group: Jeff Loader, Laura Litchfield, Corey Iverson, John Crouch, Jamie Payne, and Chris Bowen. So you have 10 minutes to present, and then we'll have questions after.
Hello.
Barber and Grieve, thank you. And welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to make sure everybody can hear me perfectly.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good day, Chair and all directors. My name is Jeff Loader. I'm Director of Public Affairs with the Hearth Patio and Barbecue Association of Canada. I'm joined today by Laura Litchfield, the President of HPBAC, John Crouch, who's Director of Public Affairs for HPBA, sort of the parent organization that represents North America and has over 30 years experience as a wood burning expert. And he's here to answer a lot of the technical questions. I'm also joined by Corey Iverson, who is the Vice President of Pacific Energy, which employs over 300 people in Duncan, BC. Jamie Payne with Norse Heating, and last but not least, Chris Bowen with Pioneer Fireplace, who is our regional as well as local rep. So I wanted to start off, I guess, by just explaining why we're here today. And there's really 2 reasons. One is we're seeking support for an industry-backed proposal and approach towards improving air quality. We provided this proposal to the village of Cumberland, the city of Courtenay, and we'll be presenting it to the town of Comox in, I think, around 2.5 to 3 weeks. So we wanted to make sure that the regional district, understanding there is the regional process ongoing, was aware of what we would be advocating for both at the regional level, but we will continue to advocate for at the municipal level, given there are bylaws in place there which we don't agree with, quite frankly. Second, we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity, I guess, to really talk about the position of industry and where we're coming from. So in the future, as we move forward, both through the regional process and dialogue at the municipal level, everybody understands sort of where we're coming from. So if you could just slide forward a couple of first slide. Hearth Patio and Barbecue Association of Canada represents manufacturers, distributors, retailers of hearth products, including solid fuel appliances, which is wood burning appliances. And we've been doing and participating in discussions at all levels, whether it is in Canada, federal, provincial, municipal, and across North America for a very long time, dealing with the exact issue that is being looked at now by the CVRD and the local municipalities related to air quality. And we have a lot of expertise and experience with that. And it's that experience that, if you could move the slide forward, is really what underpins and buttresses the proposal that we have tabled with at least 2 of the municipalities, who will table with the 3rd. And now we are tabling here at the regional level, is a industry proposal to improve air quality that's really based on securing, number 1, sustainable dry and having the seasoned wood supply for clean burning. That has been recognized as one of the fundamental issues. I don't think there's any disagreement on that. We've heard that repeatedly by the municipalities. We know it's an issue that's being discussed at the roundtable. Second, we believe there needs to be a general and targeted residential exchange program, which there has been at the heart of all efforts really across North America, quite frankly, to tackle air quality. And as it stands right now, replacing older stoves with certified stoves does not seem to be a priority. So we'd like to re-energize that. And third, we would like to continue with what industry does a lot of, but also add in some new elements to education program. None of these pillars are fundamentally new, and they've all been done before in different places and are under discussion both at the regional level and at the level of municipalities. That being said, what we are here to do today, and you can move the slide forward, is really to communicate and signal that industry is prepared to do what it takes to achieve these three pillars and the outcomes that they would produce. First is a sustainable dry and season wood supply. We consistently heard and understand that to be, the research shows that to be one of the fundamental issues. Industry is prepared to, under certain circumstances, under certain conditions, I should say, to invest in a retail woodlot to ensure that season dry wood is available across the valley. We've already started those conversations, and I was very, we will certainly reach out to Mosaic, as you know, we've really tried to look at all the opportunities to get that supply, and we will continue to do that. And some of my colleagues can speak a little bit more to that. If you move to the next slide. I'm recognizing the time here. Sorry, I'm trying to move too fast. And if I speak too fast, as I'm in St. John's, Newfoundland, and as a Newfoundlander, I often speak too fast. So feel free to ask me to clarify anything. Second is a targeted wood stove exchange program is needed. Wood burning is not going anywhere. And as long as older stoves are allowed, they will contribute to the issue. And we recognize that. Industry recognizes that's why industry, and Mr. Crouch will talk about that shortly, has spent an enormous amount of money, time, and resources over the last 20 years designing and leading the technological work required to reduce emissions related to wood stoves. And we've gotten into a place where that now happens with certified wood stoves. So in this particular case, I'll stress again that industry is prepared to really, to quote, give you a quote, put our money sort of where our mouth is on this, and make stoves available at very limited cost to people, recognizing that different clients will need different levels of financial support. And pillar 3, and again, I think here there would be no disagreement if you can move the slide forward. Thank you, or the presentation, is the need for education and proper training programs, including in-home and in-situ training, because certified wood stoves and the technology does require an understanding. It does require practice. It does require learning how to properly be used, and different fireplaces and styles have different requirements. So we are prepared to provide that on an individual basis across the valley if needed. There, if you can move. So that's the 3 pillars. If you can just move it forward. It's not necessarily perfect for flow here, but we really wanted to stress that industry is not opposed to regulation at all. In fact, we support it. We supported the adoption of regulations very recently in Quebec City, which if you flip to the next slide, that would be great, just to give you an indication. I won't get into this, where there are what we would consider appropriate regulations related to wood burning. Over a period of time, you will have to have a CSA EPA certified wood stove, and everything else will be prohibited. There's obviously a transition time when there are, environmental, well, in this case, smog days, but other reasons that justify limiting the use of any wood burning appliance. Whether it's an inversion or those type of situations, we don't have an issue with that. And what is really productive about what has occurred is they're effectively providing up to 90% of the cost of a new appliance to remove the old ones. And this has got a lot of support across all municipalities in Quebec, and is consistent with the approach that industry supports, and that it's really been adopted in various places. So if you could move forward, I appreciate it. Thank you. One of the things that we did want to also talk about today, because it's come up now several times at the round table, and it's come up in our conversations at the municipal level, is around wood stoves and how they have advanced. But also, particularly at the roundtable, there have been conversations around research and policy analysis that's coming out of the United States that, quite frankly, is not researched by the most basic standard of research. So I'm going to turn it over to John Crouch now to talk, just to give you an idea about how emissions in certified wood stoves today versus in the past. And second, to talk about the NESCOM report, which is a report out of well, it's a nonprofit organization of directors of air quality in Northeast United States, But it has come up recently at the roundtable discussions, and we felt it was important to address it at the board level now. So John, why don't you go ahead, sir?
Okay, just to let you know, you only
Oh.
have a minute left.
All right, well, John can quickly go through that, John.
All right, now the NESCOM report is largely a review of the 250 EPA certification reports. And as such, it did find some issues in the reports, but EPA has not chosen to remove any certifications. And in fact, the US EPA continues to support 3 major multi-million-dollar change-out programs, one each in California, Idaho, and Oregon. So I just think I can answer other questions if people want to send them to me. Jeff?
Thank you, John. So if you just go to the, given the time, and if you just go to what we're asking for, we're asking for the CVRD to endorse our proposal, number one. And number two, we're asking the regional district not to endorse or support any recommendations that ban the use of certified wood stoves. And we wanted to make that very clear. There's no such bans across Canada, and banning the use of a certified wood stove that meets emissions and efficiency standards and what's required across North America and across Canada today, just blanket, as is an attempt to deal with air quality is not only not going to achieve the outcome, it sends a signal that we're very uncomfortable with, that these wood stoves are not compatible with reducing GHG gases and PM matter, quite frankly. So I appreciate the opportunity, and we look forward to a productive discussion. And we really are here in the spirit of collaboration. And what I'm saying represents the views of not just local members or regional members or the members across BC, but our membership across Canada, which have approved this proposal. And I say that so when we make assertions as industry is supporting this, industry will do this, that's actually something we will follow through on. So thank you very much, Chair and directors, for allowing us to give this presentation.
Okay, thank you. You have questions? Director Arger.
Thank you, Jeff, for the really good presentation. And I have to say, you're taking me back to a couple of years ago when this board was having lots of debates on this topic, and it's been nice to see the Watershed Roundtable happen. You may not like my analogy that I'll come to, but I'm actually quite proud of the movement that's been done by the municipalities and the Comox Valley in regard to slowly weaning off this form of energy. I think your presentation leaves out all the other source of energy. We're blessed with hydroelectricity, and there's a lot of an emphasis on heat pumps these days for people to transfer to that. And we see that the trend is away from wood stoves in general, as opposed to a growing industry. The analogy I was going to make is a little bit that in some ways I think that the pitch you're making resembles a bit from what I used to hear from the cigarette industry. We're moving from cigarette to cigarette light. At the end of the day, it's 40 degrees today in the Comox valleys, and the last week has really reaffirmed my commitment to keep carbon out of the atmosphere. I think we need to be more aggressive around carbon in the transportation sector, but also in the building sector, where carbon can represent over 40% of emission plus. And I won't be a hypocrite. So I have a wood stove, right? And so we moved to a certified wood stove a few years ago, but frankly, I'm already thinking about the wonderful days when we won't have that source of energy. That's actually quite human intensive to maintain and clean up. So you won't find my support, but I appreciate the efforts you're making as an industry to improve things. And that's, it's just for myself, it doesn't quite fully resonate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Director Grieve had he has his mic on now, so I'll go to him.
Yes, thank you very, very much for this presentation. It was very serendipitous that we had a presentation for Mosaic Forest Management previous to this one. And I did ask them about the the biomass that they leave behind and how we could properly use that. They were, I think they're over now 25% reduction in their slash burning and their release of carbon into the atmosphere, which of course is open burning, which is the worst you can get. And I asked about pellet stoves, and I made this point before. We're not going to go down this rabbit hole today, folks, because this is very divisive. And, you know, I find that there's very little middle ground in this discussion. But, you know, I do think that there has to be some compromise. When it comes to burning wood, I burn my own wood from my own property, and it's usually very seasoned, 2 years old or more, usually alder or fir. So, you know, I see that as a closed loop system, especially when you can put a pot of stew on the stove and have something to eat and dry your clothes on a rack. But I would go a little further than talk about burning wood. I think that the only way to take the idiot factor out of this, and let's face it, we've had a big influx of mainlanders here on the island, people that aren't really familiar with burning wood. And I think in some of the cases, the worst offenders, you know, I think you can go to any neighborhood in the city and they can pretty well point to the house that's causing the trouble. So I would say that perhaps the way to get around this to ensure some kind of continuity in moisture content and everything else would be to go like the Scandinavian countries have gone to pellet stoves. So I did ask Mosaic about being open to pellet stoves, maybe some third party coming in and taking some of that stuff that they leave behind and turning it into something that we can actually use. Because as I say, when you deal with just splitting and burning wood, you're open to all kinds of abuses there. Whereas you have a controlled product that's uniform, I think it might be a better sell. So that's all I'm going to say. I know in my district that many people do burn wood. We have larger acreages and farms. I don't see it going anywhere. I think you made a good point there. It's not going to go away. So if we can get it down to two ounces of carbon an hour, that's pretty darn good when you consider how much it costs to move goods and services around the world today. It certainly is a huge improvement from you know, what we're seeing right now. So I thank you guys for bringing forward this side of the conversation. I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to go on. I think we need to all let go of some of our positions a little bit and take a look at what really works rather than you know, fracking gas and shipping it thousands of kilometers across the country and under the ocean to get here. We've got it in our own backyard. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grief. And I think that he makes a good point. If you're serious about reducing greenhouse gases, that the use of forestry biomass would be a much better option than the woodlot that you proposed in this presentation. And as far as the requests, I don't think that we can presuppose the outcome of the Airshed Roundtable as your request to not put forward any more regulation banning wood stoves. So I think we have to wait and rely on the experts in the science to give us the best information. But thank you so much for your presentation.
Can I just respond to some of the comments just quickly for a couple of minutes? First, as an industry, we don't agree with the comments that were made around wood burning is similar to the issue of cigarette smoke. First off, I have to note that that's an extreme characterization of the, you know, people burn wood at, you know, have been their whole lives. Number one. Number two is there's no place outside of Comox Valley in Canada where it is banned. And while we recognize there are legitimate health issues related to the dispersion of PM matter, we don't agree with the accusation that that wood burning is contributing to carbon in that same way. There is a lot of research, and we're happy to share that, quite frankly, some of the research we've done on that and how wood burning actually versus other sources reduces carbon emission. So I just note that I guess we're in a bit of a difficult spot because we've presented the round shed table process. It's ongoing, and municipalities have already acted, and they've acted to ban in advance of what recommendations would be of a regional roundtable. So there's a level of frustration we have with that. And I do want, on behalf of industry, to let everybody know that we will be making sure that our positions are understood by the general public because we represent people who burn wood. And we also represent those people who want to burn wood as a form of heat security. So I appreciate the opportunity, and we are really hopeful we can have more collaborative discussions on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Okay, we're on receipt. Anyone opposed to receipt? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we're on to reports. Item 1 report is the Solom River Agricultural Watershed Plan. Hillian and Cole Hamilton, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Mark Rutton is here to make this presentation today and to provide you an update. And just like to note that members of Chief and Council of Comox First Nation are also in attendance and listening to the report. And Mark will outline their involvement in this process as part of getting to where we are today.
All right, thank you, Russell. Is that working?
Yep.
How about that? Okay, that's better. Thank you, Russell, through the CAO and through the chair. This is a very similar presentation that was made to the Comox First Nation recently. And just before starting, I'd like to make a couple of introductions for people that are on the Zoom call. So we have Richard Hardy, a counselor with Comox First Nation. Richard and Ron Frank have provided some major contributions to this study work. And Richard's here on the call to help answer any questions that might come up that he might be able to help with. Also, I'd like to introduce Christina Metherall. She's with Elucidate Consulting, and Christina was the primary author for this report, and she's worked closely with CVRD to facilitate the discussions with Comox First Nation and with all of the other stakeholders in this process. Also, Vince Van Tongeren, our engineering analyst, is also on the call, and he's supported this study work. And then one last introduction, someone who's not on the call, but Derry Monteith, our manager of liquid waste planning. And Derry would normally make this presentation, but she can't be here today. And she's been really instrumental in facilitating this study work, working closely with all of the stakeholders with Comox First Nation, ensuring that all the interests that are affected are reflected in this report. Derry's going to provide a presentation at the next EASC. So they'll be similar to tonight's presentation, but it will include recommendations for the area directors to consider. All right, so.
Chair Keller, if I could, we also have Councillor Catherine Frank and Todd Boychuk from the Comox First Nation for intergovernmental relations.
Great, thanks.
Thought, we introduce those two folks as well.
Thanks for that, Richard.
Great, thank you, Richard. All right, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I got the thing here. Okay, thanks, Lisa. So project background, funding for this study has been provided by the Investment Agriculture Foundation of BC. The intent of the funding is to provide an improved understanding of current and future surface and groundwater needs for agriculture, and to identify and consider agriculture interests along other interests in the watershed, and help lessen the potential for any conflict. There's a long history of food production in the Solom watershed, and agriculture plays an important and growing role in the community. So there's a very high level of interest in understanding the ongoing concerns about water in this area. And that interest was really reflected by everyone that was involved in this project. The interest in securing local food has been further reinforced during COVID. And although we're only a few days into this current heat wave, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about water security, in all parts of the Comox Valley. Throughout the work undertaken as part of this project, we have opened a dialogue between CVRD and KFN regarding watershed stewardship in the Solon River watershed and a vision for continued collaboration with KFN. A big thanks to Councillor Hardy and Ron Frank, who dedicated a lot of energy and patience into sharing the perspective of Comox First Nation and their relationship with the watershed. KFN also generously shared the results of their recent groundwater study work to support this project. And our assessment of the watershed health would not have been possible without this additional study work. The CVRD is committed to continuing building this relationship with KFN and advancing reconciliation, and the collaborative approach laid out in the final report speaks to this commitment to align our governance, management, and policy development with the BC Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. We understand that the waters flowing through the Comox, through the valley hold a deep cultural significance to KFN, and that Comox has cultural and spiritual laws related to water. Access to water is critical to Comox culture and exercise of rights. It is the right of Comox and all Indigenous peoples to connect with and protect the land and waters in their traditional territories and to participate in decision-making that affects their rights. We also recognize and respect KFN's 4 pillars: authority, jurisdiction, governance, and management over natural resources within the territory. CVRD staff and KFN representatives have discussed and shared a vision for watershed governance involving co-management, co-development of policy, and to protect groundwater and surface water health. And while there is further discussion of council, board, and staff required to investigate and develop our collaborative approach, the dialogue between KFN and CVRD during this project shows a promising way forward. So study work for this project has been completed in 2 phases. Phase 1 was completed in 2018 and 2019, and it involved gathering and interpreting existing data and knowledge, community engagement with KFN, and recommendations for next steps. We found through the phase 1 work, what we found is that groundwater accounts for the majority of water used in the watershed, and that agriculture is the primary user of water. Phase 1 work also identified that water storage capacity would need to be increased to meet the joint challenges of agriculture, environmental protection, and climate change. Phase 2 work, initiated in 2020, included investigation of water storage and management options, further assessment of watershed health, evaluation of environmental risk under future scenarios, and future recommendations. So we received feedback from Comox First Nation on all of the technical and study work, and also from the community. So it's got 2 slides here on feedback. We heard that KFN has significant concerns about increasing water demand without fully understanding the watershed system. A core principle for Comox First Nation is that everything is connected, and it's believed that there is insufficient understanding of the watershed system at this time. In particular, we heard concerns that this project may support additional groundwater use that could lead to infringement of rights. Also heard that from Comox First Nation perspective, also heard from Comox First Nation representatives about water quality. Some examples were provided around materials from tires and hydrocarbons entering the river and endangering fish, along with increased nutrients from agriculture. We also heard support for a more collaborative approach to watershed management, as well as support for actions that could be taken to protect watershed health. A roundtable approach was suggested to guide future planning activities and to bring people from all backgrounds to the table. There's a lot of knowledge and passion for agriculture and watershed stewardship in the area, and it's felt that bringing people together to solve problems can really mobilize this knowledge and enable greater understanding and collaboration. And finally, one of the themes woven throughout all of our discussions was a need for harmonization of Western science and Indigenous knowledge, which will involve ongoing collaboration. Community feedback. We also received a great deal of feedback from farmers, stewardship groups, and the larger community. Water supply is currently a limiting factor and becoming an increasing concern in the community. There's a desire for more support for producers in water storage and stewardship. We heard from local producers that they are increasingly experiencing barriers in their businesses and reduced supports. Given that the second largest land use in the watershed is agriculture, yet many producers operate with very small financial margins, it was recommended to provide incentives for water storage and environmental stewardship on farmlands. We also heard agricultural water should be a priority on ALR land. There are concerns that increased residential development on ALR land and unregulated domestic use will further reduce water availability and cause a death by 1,000 cuts to agriculture. For ALR land to be available for farming, it was suggested that land and water use policies prioritize agricultural water use on ALR land. We heard concerns regarding climate change and the need to restore hydraulic function and health of the watershed. Also concerns about the impacts from forestry activities. The majority of the land in the watershed is privately managed forest lands. The community has noticed correlations between forest activities and hydraulic impacts and is interested in seeing this relationship further investigated to mitigate actions. Again, it was acknowledged that we need to a better understanding of the watershed, and additional ground and surface water monitoring is recommended. We also heard support for a roundtable approach, similar to the support provided for that by KFN, and also an interest in developing a water sustainability plan, applying to a tool available under the Water Sustainability Act. So on to the recommendations. The report does make 7 recommendations. These are summarized on the next 2 slides. Feedback and input on these recommendations was provided by the technical teams that completed the assessment, by Comox First Nation, Comox Valley Farmers Institute, Mid-Island Farmers Institute, Solom River Restoration Society, Comox Valley Partnership, Conservation Partnership, and the Agricultural Watershed Public Advisory Committee. So recommendation 1 is collaborative watershed management. Establish a local government service to support watershed stewardship efforts, further collaboration with KFN, and utilizing a roundtable approach to water management. So it's essentially providing the resources towards further supporting watershed stewardship efforts. Recommendation 2, to enhance land use planning by considering information on water resources and agriculture. Land use planning and zoning has historically been developed with limited consideration towards water stewardship. So this work would be to strengthen existing policy statements in the RGS and other policies around land use, considering water availability. Recommendation 3, advocate for the use of provincial water management tools, such as, to protect watershed health and agricultural water supplies. The province does provide some tools under the Water Sustainability Act, such as Sustainability Plan, Agricultural Water Reserve, or water objectives. Where there's alignment of interest between local governments and First Nations, there can be better provincial support for use of some of these tools. And just one note is these tools are relatively new and have not been used a lot in the province, but they are available as tools. Recommendation 4, support producers and the community in water management and water stewardship. So the report identifies several actions to support those who live and work in the Solom watershed for improving and maintaining watershed health and agriculture. Number 5, improved understanding of the watershed. The phase 1 and 2 reports have identified the need for further data collection to support improved understanding of the watershed, monitoring and documenting indicators such as groundwater and surface water levels, water consumption, water quality, forest practices, and aquatic habitat, along with existing Indigenous knowledge, Western science, and observational knowledge will better inform water stewardship. Recommendation 6, improve understanding of the impact of climate change. The predicted impact of climate change on agriculture production and resulting increases in water demand was central to much of the technical work completed in this phase 1 and 2 report. Further technical work is required to better understand how climate change will impact water supply and stream hydrology within the watershed. And recommendation 7, take a conservative approach to future water use. So in light of the findings of the EFN risk assessment, caution is recommended in considering applications for future water use in the Solon watershed. Several recommended actions are provided for consideration by regulators in assessing current and future licensed water use. So like I said at the beginning of this presentation, staff will provide recommendations to EASC at their July meeting to further support watershed planning in the Solon River. Thank you very much. And myself, Richard, Christina are all available for questions if there are any.
Great. Thanks, Mark and Director Mir.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you to Mark and all the staff and KFN. Sincere thanks for your participation. I think your recommendations and your embedding in this process is very critical for the regional district to move ahead in a way that supports our stance on commitment to reconciliation. So I really want to thank you for participating as deeply as you have. To be upfront, I'm also a farmer in the Solon River watershed. Portuguese Creek runs right through the back of my property, and I'm quite connected to this issue in particular. It's quite close to my heart. And I swim in the Solon. I'm noticing the Solon River this year is extremely warm, and I'm quite worried about what that is going to mean to salmon stocks in the fall. I think overall, I agree with where staff are taking this in terms of recommendations for a sort of overall watershed planning service. I think that's something that's needed so that we don't sort of trade off extracting from the river with extracting from groundwater. I think that's a really important point to consider. My one worry though is, by going so big, if we may have lost a little bit of the acute issue that we have in the Solon with the oversubscription of water. If I remember back to 2018 when the process started, what I understood was that there were, less than about 20 licenses on the Solon to extract water, and those were primarily from dairy and cattle farms. And when I look at the recommendations of how to do some water conservation, either through dugouts or through irrigation management, the irrigation management did kind of tweak me in my understanding that drip irrigation is not something that most dairy and cattle farmers can use. So I know this is quite a technical, and I don't know if anyone has an answer to this. Like, how do we conserve the water that's currently being extracted out of the Solon? Were any of those recommendations able to sort of support the very acute problem that we're having right now?
I might ask Christina to speak to this question because it is quite technical and she's our technical expert. So Christina, do you have a response?
Yes, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Director Hamir, for the question. That is an excellent observation. I think we did go from having quite a condensed focus for this project and then zooming out, and I think there is certainly a lot of value in zooming out, but I appreciate your suggestion that we make sure we don't lose our targets either. So a couple of the recommended actions that are in the plan to address specifically water conservation with dairy. One of the recommendations is variety trials. So working with the Climate Action Initiative to try different seed types or different types of crops that might be more drought tolerant and might require less water. Another recommendation that was provided actually initially in our conversations with the Comox First Nation is to focus on building soil and focus on sharing knowledge about improved dryland practices and soil supplementation and that sort of thing, because we recognize that there realistically are limits to the amount of water that's available, particularly with changing climate. And a third one that comes to mind is farm storage. So as you probably recall, having looked at the report, we did look at several different water storage and supply options. None of them stood out particularly as kind of the top choice. Dugout was first, and then I believe either reclaimed water or Wolf Lake were second, but they were far more complicated. And I think that obviously dugouts would be an excellent choice moving forwards, but there's a lot of barriers with that. And I think some of the other recommendations in the plan, like building capacity, can create the support needed to kind of work through overcoming some of those barriers.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I fully support that movement towards the variety trials and the building of soil. I'm wondering if you got an initial response from like the Farmers Institute members who sort of represent that sector. Is there a willingness amongst farmers to go that route?
Certainly. I think the variety trials definitely came across as kind of a no-brainer for a lot of people. There was a real interest in that. I think with building soil, I think that is an area where I think that there's a lot of different perspectives on kind of the best approach for that. And I think that further conversation is needed to kind of understand what's best. A lot of the larger producers said that they had an interest in soil amendments and trying to coordinate better access to soil amendments and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Director Arbour.
Thank you for the report and the work. And I'm glad that Dr. Hamir made the link to salmon. Like years ago, I used to work with an organization who our geography was to work where the salmon lives or used to live. And so that allowed us to work in Southern California. And listening to the report today, I think we have the benefit of being a little north. And when I say the benefit is that we can learn, the entire coast is really dependent on snow caps and glaciers. And the last few days, I can literally feel the Comox glaciers melting before our eyes. And there's still a lot of life left into it, but the trend is probably not going to change. And I think, I look forward to more discussion at ESC in a sense that this is the start of a journey on trying to address these problems that are likely to just exacerbate over time. And at Anchor, my only thought would be if we have the time to look at how, for example, in the San Juan Basin, the agricultural sector has had to deeply adapt based on water quantity, water temperature. Many of their rivers barely make it to the ocean anymore. And I think if we can learn early on how to avoid those types of scenarios, the better we'll be served and that our businesses will continue to thrive. Because I think just continuing to ignore that is probably not very wise. So I'm really glad to see this project kind of bringing all this, and with leadership from Comox First Nation is even better. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McCullum.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. I wasn't on the board when phase one was presented, but I certainly found this report to be very useful and very illuminating of a lot of issues that we're facing in this area, specifically around climate change and managing our resources in an effective and sustainable way. One question that I had that I was hoping maybe you could expand on is just around how much cooperation we're expecting and we've experienced at this point with the provincial government. It strikes me that a lot of the tools that we have to manage this going forward is going to need a lot of cooperation from FLNRO, or whatever the correct acronym is currently. And just if you could comment on how well they've come to the table at this point, and maybe what challenges that we're expecting going forward, if any.
Yeah, thank you. I think again, I'll ask Christina to probably speak to this question. As you know, we had representation from the province, and although I wasn't able to attend all of the meetings, so she'll probably have better insight into that.
That's an excellent question. Thank you. I think we have seen really good engagement with the province, of course, in attending all of the meetings and ensuring there's representation there. I think, as you have mentioned, there's a lot of actions here, though, that require a lot deeper engagement. And I think we've seen some of that already. In phase 1, I remember reaching out to provincial government staff and saying, oh, I'm working on this project in the Solom. There's an interest in a water sustainability plan. And, they said, well, we didn't really see that as one of the early targets for that kind of, more involved action. And now when I speak to them, they say, yep, we kind of see the writing on the wall here. We see that we're going to see this conversation coming up again. And I think they're, I know they have limited resources as well, and that's something we hear, but I think that they recognize that there's going to be a request for further collaboration. One of the ways we have seen some of this project actually create some beneficial action already is with the environmental flow needs risk assessment. They recognized that several of the Portuguese Creek subwatershed and the lower Solom were identified as high risk. So now, thanks to that work, we actually have the province going in and doing some monitoring to really better understand low flows. And that monitoring is starting this year and will continue for the next several years as part of this work.
Christine, if I could add just a little bit more to that last comment. It's BC and the Comox First Nation that are implementing that environmental flow monitoring project. So we've set up a station, like you said, on this one and one on Portuguese Creek, and we'll be collaborating with BC in monitoring and doing a review of the data afterwards.
That's great. This project seems like a really great opportunity to build on our relationships with other governments. So specifically KFN, but also, leveraging data collection to make better decision-making from both locally and at the provincial level. I had one other question, if I could, Chair.
There's two others. We might come back to you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Hillian.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation. It's a long report. I won't confess to have digested all of it, but there's obviously a lot of work involved. Yet it strikes me that we've come a long way from the days when the Solom was polluted by mining tailings. And I just wondered whether Richard or any of the other representatives of the nation would like to comment on the prospects for this collaborative management process that we're embarking on.
Yeah, I guess I could chime in on that. I think Mark has given a pretty good summary of the report in regards to some of the outcomes that Comox would like to see undertaken with regards to this work. I think we are just we have so much more work that needs to be undertaken here. There's a lot of work that needs to be done or undertaken between Comox and the CVRD, and also with Comox and the province of British Columbia. I think right now we're at a good place in regards to there's a strong desire for collaboration. in regards to resourcing the activities that we need to undertake down the road. I think that, you know, as we have more and more dialogue with the province of British Columbia, I think that there will be that availability for resourcing this important work for us down the road. I guess if I could maybe add one more point in regards to if anybody's read the report, in regards to the amount of water that is used today, and in comparison to the amount of water that's going to be used or forecasted to be used by the year 2050, we're looking at a 300%, over a 300% increase in access to water. So there is a lot of work for us to ensure that we don't get to that place where we're increasing access to, or increasing that access to water by over 300%. So I'm not sure if I answered your question fully enough there, Director, but
no, thanks, Richard.
Furthermore, I can follow up with you afterwards.
Yeah, I think that the commitment to a collaborative process is something that will help to ensure the health of the water supply. I'm just wondering as well if anybody can comment on whether or not there'll be an ongoing role for the Solom River Restoration Society, which I think has been quite active promoting the health of the river in the past.
Again, from a KFM perspective, I mean, we have a great working relationship with Wayne White and the rest of his team. He actually came out for a quick visit with ourselves in the province last week when we were setting up a monitoring station there on the Solom. So yeah, we had about an hour and 15-minute chin wag with Wayne. He's very knowledgeable about the Solom as well as ourselves and our guardians. And I think down the road, there'll be a strong collaboration.
Yeah, that's great. Wayne's one of the most knowledgeable people in relation to land and water use in the valley. So I'm really glad to hear that he'll continue to be involved. Thanks very much.
Yeah, Director Hillian, on the feedback from Comox First Nation and from the community, you know, both recommended that a roundtable approach be used going forward, and I would suggest that the Solom River Restoration Society would be, you know, a key member on that roundtable.
Thank you, Director Hamir.
Thanks. Thanks for giving me a second question. I just wanted to thank Director McCollum for bringing up the issue around the jurisdictions and where some of the decision-making power is. You know, my understanding of what is going to be needed, if my understanding is that the current licenses on the Solom are issued by FLNRO, and if we are to move to, you know, what was recommended in number 3, which is a different, like an agricultural water reserve, it sounds like, Christina, that maybe there's some interest in FLNRO on that part. But my question is more actually around wells, because right now, pretty much, you know, anyone can just put a well in, and then, you know, it's up to the province to license those, usually after the fact. And I'm wondering, are you foreseeing a change in that system? Because the power really lies with the province there in allowing that well to be used for agricultural purposes. Yeah, maybe can you comment on that at all? Like the whole idea of limiting how much of our groundwater can be extracted.
That's an excellent question, and one that sorry, am I supposed to be speaking? Sorry, Mark.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and one that I probably have not fully done my homework for. Certainly the province has at this time, under of course the colonial legal system, has the responsibility for providing water authorizations. There is some room in the Water Sustainability Act for some of that decision-making authority to be selectively delegated, but I personally wouldn't I don't see that happening necessarily in the near future. I think there's a lot of building blocks that would have to be put in place, and a lot of kind of change happen at the provincial level for that to seem to be, for me to say that would happen tomorrow. But I do feel like there's a lot that can be done at the local government level. So while the province has, a large role to say in the use of water for, say, irrigation, I know that they're, bringing the licensing for groundwater online. The local government has a large role to play in making decision-making about water use for domestic purposes. And I think that that's a really interesting point to consider. There won't be a subdivision of domestic wells going into the ground if it isn't in alignment with local land use planning. So I think that's a way in which, while the province does have the say in some of those larger licenses, there can be a significant role for the CVRD with that as well. And there are several ways in which the CVRD can have input in the use of water on ALR land. And some of those are detailed in the report.
Great, thank you. And I did promise to go back to Dr. McCollum. Do you still have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, the other question I had that I didn't see highlighted in the report is just the higher altitude range of the watershed, and I couldn't really tell from the map whether or not it does extend up into the alpine, but something that I've heard raised by conservation groups is that logging in those upper reaches really increases how quickly we lose the snowpack, and that it's difficult for those forests to regenerate, and that maintaining alpine forests can really improve watershed health. And I'm wondering if that's true for the Solom, and if that has played into anything in the report. And again, I don't see it as a top thing in the recommendations, but just wondering if it was given consideration. And I didn't see that Mosaic was part of the list of who was engaged in the report. So,
yeah, I can start. Maybe Christina can help out. But Mosaic did participate on the advisory committee, and the report does comment that there is a better understanding required of the impact of harvesting in the upper watershed to what's happening down below. So I don't know if it came out as one of the recommendations, but definitely in the community feedback, there's a feeling that there is more knowledge required, that there's an observation that harvesting does have an impact, and there's more information required on exactly what that impact is and how it can be mitigated. And Christina, is there anything to add to that?
Sure, yes. It absolutely came up as probably the #1 comment in all of our meetings. And it is something that we recognize as important to the community, and is included in the recommendations is further work to understand the relationship between forestry activities and hydrology, in particular low flows. It's a really complicated topic, and the interplay between hydrology and harvesting is very complex with many different factors involved. So it's hard to say with any complete certainty that it has a role to play in the Solom. It is an area of growing research with climate change. We're seeing much greater interest in understanding the relationship between forest harvesting and low flows in particular. Past research has really focused on high flows and flooding. Currently, the information that's available does suggest that there is a relationship, particularly, actually, I probably shouldn't get into the technical details now. I probably should do a bit more homework first, but there certainly is likely to be a relationship, and in some way, but far more work is needed to really understand the role and the relationship in the Solom, and potential actions that could be taken to mitigate it.
Great, thanks for that.
Great, I don't see any more questions. But it's clear that more data would be helpful, and I'm thankful for the Comox First Nation and their monitoring that they're doing in conjunction with the province, and also for all their knowledge sharing on this plan and all the input that they've had to date. So thanks for your participation today. And thank you, Christina and Mark, for the report. And we're on receipt. Anyone opposed to receipt? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too. Take care, Jess.
Okay, so we're on to item 2, which is Electoral Area Service Committee receipt of minutes for June 14th. Grieve and Arbor, thank you. Anyone opposed to receipt of those minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We're on to recommendation 1. Grieve and Mir, thank you. And is there any discussion about Park and Marine? Eagles Drive? Okay, and is there anyone opposed to the recommendation? It's the area, the vote of the areas. Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. On to recommendation 2.
Move DV 4B21.
Okay. And is there any further discussion? Richardson on Jackson Drive. Okay, and it's a vote of the areas. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried.
Move DV 3B21.
Oh, my apologies. Yeah, the last one was Gottman on Butchers, and this one is Richardson on Jackson Drive. So that was Grieve and Hamir. And any further discussion? And is there anyone opposed? That's carried. On to recommendation 4. Hamir and Arbor. And this is on CV Road. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We're on to recommendation 5.
Madam Chair, before you consider recommendation 5, as it's in the agricultural land reserve, I just remove myself in consideration of the perceived conflict of interest, as my wife is the chair of the Land Commission, so I'll remove myself from the room for this one.
Thank you to our CAO. Cole, Hamilton, and Grieve have moved recommendation 5. Looney on Anderton Road. Any further discussion? And it's both the areas. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. On to recommendation 6. Arbor and Morin, thank you. And this is a subdivision. Union Bay Estates. Any further discussion? This is both the areas. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. Recommendation 7. Grieve and Hamir. Any further discussion? So rural Comox Valley zoning bylaw amendment about keeping chickens and beekeeping. Yay. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried.
I know we're bringing urban chickens.
Yeah. Recommendation 8, moved by Hamir, seconded by Arbor. Coastal flood mapping. It's above the areas. Oh, Director Arbor, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this one will be coming to the municipalities as far as I understand in terms of presentation. It's amazing project looking at all the coastlines and projections around climate change and the impacts. I just want to confirm with staff that presentations will be made to the municipalities.
I'll just refer to Ivana Malawi in terms of the process and how it will unfold with our stakeholders.
Through Madam Chair to the directors. We're currently preparing all of the data sharing agreements to send out, and we expect that package likely to go to the municipalities and our other partners by the end of next week. It's not our intention to follow up on a mapping presentation to each of the councils. However, we're certainly available to their staff as needed to dig into the information. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Director Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you. I realize we're accepting this for receipt, and I may be obtuse, but I couldn't figure out where the report was. There's no link I could find here. And is the final summary report, and I looked on the webpage for if we're receiving it, where is it?
It's through the chair to the directors. So the package would be in the minutes from the Electoral Area Services Committee, which is, I think, made available. Lisa, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll just go back to there and grab it. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Director Arbor.
Yeah, I may just follow up on this one just as a general comment, maybe for future, if we could hyperlink these things directly, if it's possible for consideration either next year or in the future, it might make the life of directors easier. Thanks.
Good suggestion, thank you. Any further comments, questions? It's above the areas. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. On to recommendation 9. Okay. This is dealing with Cougar Smith Road. Any further comments? Below the areas, anyone opposed? Hearing none, that's carried. And on to recommendation 10. McCollum and Warren, thank you. This is Oyster River Way and Schultz Road. Any further comments? And below the areas, anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We're on to recommendation 11. Arbor and Grieve, thank you. And this is in regard to Salisbury Road. Below the areas, anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We're on to recommendation 12.
Move 12.
Grieve and Arbor, thank you. And it's the floodplain management bylaw. And flood construction levels. Any further comments, questions? Again, it's below the areas. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. We're on to item 3, the Comox Valley Sewage Commission minutes from June 15th. Hillian and Cole-Hamilton, thank you. And there's anyone opposed to receipt of those minutes? It's below the full board. Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we're on to item 4, Comox Valley Water Committee minutes from June 15th. Hillian and Warren, thank you. And again, voted full board. Anyone opposed to receipt of those minutes? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we're on to item 5, Statement of Financial Information 2020. McCollum and Cole-Hamilton, thank you.
And Madam Chair, I'll just ask Kevin Tavell to come forward, Manager of Finance, to provide a brief outline of the Statement of Financial Information and what is provided here. It's an annual report.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to the directors, good afternoon. First off, CFO Mariah Fort sends her apologies. She was unable to attend today, so I've just quickly stepped in to try and provide you a brief summary on this report. So as the board may recall, at the June 15th meeting of the board, the annual financial statements were presented for the fiscal year 2020. And now presenting to you today, the Statement of Financial Information was this, which is the second of 2 requirements under legislation as far as our meeting our commitments of open sea transparency and accountability. So what's in front of you today is the Statement of Financial Information for the year 2020. And just to give you kind of some sense of what's in there. As the report indicates, for 2020, we identified $120 million in supplier investment for the year. That's versus 75 million in 2019. And of course, that's largely driven by the ongoing development of the water treatment plant. So that was largely a single vendor that contributed to the largest share of that increase. With respect to staff remuneration, that totaled 16.4 million in 2020. That was actually down slightly from 2019, which was at 17 million, and that would have largely been, contributed partly to the COVID-19 pandemic. To give you a sense of the number of staff year over year that have been reported in this year's report, we have 72 staff now reported on the SOFI report in 2020. That's versus 54 in 2019. And that was largely driven by the fact that we had approximately 18 staff that were very close to the threshold of 75,000 last year, and now they've actually exceeded that threshold. That threshold, of course, hasn't been amended in, I believe it's approximately 20 or so years. So we do have more and more staff starting to creep into that threshold. I know one question that did kind of come up that I would like to respond to is with respect to the addition of the one additional pay period in 2020. So as it indicates in the report, once every 11 years, we do run into this scenario, particularly with respect to biweekly or weekly pay periods. So again, that's largely driven by the nature of 2020, for example, being a leap year. And so as those leap years accumulate and the calendar kind of drives things, you will, as I said, once every 11 years, see that additional pay period creep up. We do obviously report that accordingly, and then depending on how the pay period was addressed, we would then allocate or adjust back, into the appropriate fiscal year. So, for example, pay period 1 for 2020 actually included some 2019 payroll, so we would have adjusted that back after things said. Versus at the end of last year, the final, the 26th pay period actually would have ended about mid-December, and that last pay period, being 27, would have crept into 2021, and then we would have made the adjustments accordingly. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear for all the directors, and I'll probably leave it at there and certainly be willing to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Director Arbour has a question.
Just a brief one. In regards to the threshold, is that something that's provincially mandated, or it's something that could be adjusted at the Comox Valley Regional District or other municipalities? Because I think to the general public, it becomes more meaningless as pretty much every employee will creep into that zone eventually.
Through the chair to the director. So yes, it is a mandated threshold. And as I said, I think it's been in place for at least 20 to 25 years now. So I know in speaking to a number of other regional districts, there is some desire to see if that threshold could be raised, because yes, we do have more and more staff starting to enter into that kind of level.
Great, thank you. I don't see any further questions. So thank you to you and to Mariah. And we're on receipt. Anyone opposed to receipt of Sophie? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And there's a Hillian and Mir, thank you. And the recommendation is that the 2020 Statement of Financial Information for the Comox Valley Regional District be approved. It's above the full board. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. Thank you. We're on to item 6, Director Annual Activity Reports for 2020. Director Arbour and McCullum, thank you. And there's a number of reports from the directors in there, just outlining our internal and external activities. And I'll just give the opportunity for anyone who wants to address the report verbally. Not seeing any takers. It's too hot. Okay, so we'll go to receipt then. It's a vote of full board. Anyone opposed to receipt? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. And so we're on to item 7, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation Statutory Holiday. Grieve and Hamir, thank you. And is it something that staff want to?
It's an information report on the response to, and to advise you on the response here at the Regional District on our services, and we're available to answer any of your questions if there are any.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. I think you said for this year, Russell, that we would be closing our offices and other services except for our waste management will stay open this year.
Yep, that is correct. And we referred that to the Solid Waste Management Board to inform them as well. And the difficulty is that we have obligations to provide the service to our municipal partners. And there isn't enough time to make adjustments in terms of receiving waste on that day. So we will look at working with our stakeholders for alternatives to hopefully close the facility in subsequent years.
Great, thank you. Not seeing any further hands, so we're on receipt. So vote of the full board. Anyone opposed to receipt? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. And we're on to item 8, which is the assessment and reconciliation plan. Amir and Cole Hamilton, thank you. And I'll pass it to staff.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And I will ask James Warren, Deputy CAO, to provide an outline of this report and answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Russell, and good afternoon, Directors. This is just a brief presentation. There's no PowerPoint to go along with this. So in January of 2020, the board adopted an Indigenous relations framework, and that framework included 3 key action areas: developing policy, strengthening relationships, and supporting learning. In January of 2021, the board then established a statement of reconciliation, as well as affirming a series of actions related to Indigenous relations in the work that we do. The actions included the regular Comox First Nation Chief and Council meetings where we discuss projects and the work that we undertake, education, both for elected officials and internal for staff, and some of the programming around summer recreation and other activities, working with our services. Also identified in that report in January was the development of mid to long-term actions to advance reconciliation. It was noted as an important activity to cement those tasks, both large and small, to respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions, building on the work that the CVRD is already doing. Today's report includes a scope of work for undertaking such an assessment. We would be looking for help from a consultant to assess what the CVRD is currently doing, take a look at what other jurisdictions are doing around their own actions, and then proposing real actions and meaningful tasks that will work towards reconciliation. We're intending that the board will be involved and looking for a session likely in October where we would be soliciting feedback and trying to get the board's intent around some of these actions. As well, we would be working with and keeping KFN apprised of the different actions that we're undertaking and proposing. And then the final goal would be that a plan is presented to the board by the end of this year. So, Madam Chair, if you have any questions or discussion, happy to entertain.
Great, thanks, James. Yeah, I think this is really important that we're doing our best to build really good government-to-government relations with our local First Nations and beyond. And from the meetings that I've had with other regions, I think we're leading in a lot of ways. And so I think that's great, as much more legislation, I'm sure, is going to come our way. And so we can do our best to be on top of that. But I'm really appreciative of the relationship that we do have with Comox First Nation. Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. Oh, we can actually talk. I haven't talked all meeting, which is a miracle, I know, for many of you. But I just wondered, I know we do a lot of work with KFN, and this framework does seem like it's broader than that. And I just wanted to know if there was any details that could be provided about how that broad scope could be implemented.
So certainly this is not intended to be focused entirely on KFN. And there very much awareness that there is Indigenous peoples throughout the community. We intend to work and build on our existing relationship with the Watershed Friendship Center as another key stakeholder, a key partner in the community. And I think what we're looking for is that external view to be able to assess how we're doing in terms of what we're currently doing, as well as those opportunities to move forward.
Go ahead, comment.
Yeah, I think maybe that can be part of our discussions going forward. There are some other organizations and particularly some women's elders groups in urban elders who I think would be really open and wanting to be part of this. So I think if we can expand on those relationships, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Director Moore. Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. Just two suggestions that we might want to consider. I was reminded when we had the presentation from Sid Williams Theatre earlier tonight that we talked a couple of years ago about perhaps co-sponsoring with Comox First Nation a presentation by Jesse Morin on the history that was given to the board to the larger community and the use of the SID for something like that. And I think that would still be an excellent step to take because in spite of the increased awareness that recent tragic events has generated, I think there's still a lot of people who really have no idea of the number of Indigenous people who lived here and the scale and complexity of the society that they built before settlement started to begin. The second suggestion I would make is that we consider looking for ways to engage some of the youth in the community who are expressing a lot of suggestions and recommendations that they want to see us take part in. And I think by engaging them in some type of dialogue in relation to this issue that we would be building that constituency's awareness and involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hillian. Good points. And I think, awareness is a huge part of reconciliation. And so we're definitely trying to do our best to build on that. Is there any further comments, questions? Okay, we're on receipt and it's a vote of the full board. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. Thank you. Director Grieve and Warren have moved the recommendation that the board support developing mid and long-term strategies to implement the Indigenous Relations Framework as described in the staff report dated June 24th, 2021. And it's a vote of the full board. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we're on to item 9, Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce presentation follow-up. Director Arbor and Hamir, thank you. And is there any further discussion? I think it was a letter that was posted to Director's Files from Lisa Kilpatrick, and she contacted Diane Hawkins about her presentation. Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that the staff report was careful not to commit us to anything, but I also want to note that it didn't close the door to future dialogue. And I think when the presentation was made, there were a lot of us who were quite encouraged by it. And I don't want to take the lack of action as a lack of support. So I just wanted to note that and in receiving this, that we're not closing the door to future dialogue if circumstances permit. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Director. Yeah, I think that as it states in the letter that we've just made our budget commitments for the year. So that's part of what was being conveyed, and that, yeah, there's certainly room for partnership in the future. Okay, it's a vote full board. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we're on to bylaws and resolutions for first and second reading. Item 1 is bylaw 602, the rural zoning bylaw. No. First and second. Director Arbor and Director Cole-Thompson. And it's a vote of the areas. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. Now we're on to adoption. So item 2 was bylaw 661, the Union Bay water tolls. Grant and Hamir. And it's a vote of the full board. Oh, Director Arbor, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. the next 4 recommendations are really to adopt the bylaws coming from Union Bay. And on this first one, I just want to maybe have staff address. There was a bit of chatter and concerns in the community regarding a concern that maybe the rates were expressed differently, and some believe that maybe we were increasing them. Can staff just reassure the public that that is not the case?
Is it Mark or James to answer that? James? Thanks.
I'll save Mark to walk up, but please do walk up if I need the help. No, the rates are not changing. The bylaws are being amended to enable the opportunity for quarterly billing rather than bi-monthly billing. And so the impact would be no change to the residents in terms of the total bill. And that was confirmed through some dialogue with Mariah Fort and engineering. So.
Great, thank you. So it's for adoption, 661. It's a vote full board. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's adopted. We're on to item 3, bylaw 662. It's fire services. Hillian and Grant, thank you. Vote the full board. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We're on to bylaw 663. The Union Bay parcel tax. Near and Grant, thanks. And it's for the full board. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We're on to bylaw 664, Union Bay water use distribution regulation. Grant and Grieve, thank you. And again, vote the full board. Anyone opposed? Oh, sorry. Director Arbor, go ahead.
Yeah, before we vote on this one, I'd just like to note that this is the last bylaw for consideration before we welcome the Union Bay services to the regional district. And for the board's knowledge, there will be a small ceremony tomorrow in Union Bay with the departing board, and some of them will, as you know, remain part of our transition committee for the next 3 months. But it's been a great process. I really want to thank staff for it. And I guess I'm not speaking to the motion, so I'll pass it back to the chair.
That's good. I appreciate the background. Thank you. Again, it's both full board. Anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. And we welcome Union Bay. Okay. We're on to new business. Item 1 is public hearing bylaw. Grant and Hillian, thank you. And do staff want to speak to this?
Jake, do you want to just explain the rationale for the resolution? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russell. Through the chair, yes, this is a standard practice in which after the board gives first and second reading into a zoning bylaw amendment, it is in order then to schedule a public hearing. And so this resolution seeks to schedule a public hearing as well as appoint the chair and vice chairs respectively for that session. You will note that, of course, this does propose the conduct of an electronic public hearing just in light of the ongoing public health restrictions. And with that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions. And this, of course, reflects concerns bylaw 602, which was the update to a number of the sort of what you could term housekeeping as well as chickens and bees changes to the zoning bylaw.
Great. Thanks, Jake. So we're on receipt. Anyone opposed to receipt? It's above the areas. Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And there's a recommendation. And as Jake highlighted, we'll need to appoint directors within that. Director Arbor.
I would like to recommend that we fill the blank spot with the first one with Director Hamir, who is designated as the chair, and Directors Grieve as first vice chair, and Arbor as second vice chair. Thank you.
Okay. Director Arbor, I think Director Hamir seconded. And it's a vote of the areas. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Oh, is there anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. Thank you. All right, the next step is for us to move into in camera.